You are back on the Mountain Morning Show, and with us, our friend Bill Humbert, Recruiter Guy. How are you, my friend?
I'm well, Joe. Thank you.
Yeah, it's great. It's great to have you here as always, my friend. Especially, I think, when we get into spring, people start thinking fresh and new. Maybe find a new job. Maybe do something different. We think also of finding new employees. Maybe a change there.
That's right. You know, this is the time of the year when companies are looking for new people.
Indeed. So nothing wrong with that. The question is, you know, as far as especially managers, I find, do they know how to do the interview? I've seen a lot. I've been to a lot of interviews where it seemed like I was doing the interview.
You know, Joe, it's really interesting. Most managers have really never been taught how to interview.
Right.
And so if you haven't been taught how to interview, you certainly haven't been taught how to select the best person.
Mm-hmm.
And
okay.
Therefore, that interviewing training is so important.
Right, because if we're doing it wrong, we might be getting a subpar candidate.
They'll
right?
be getting the wrong people. They'll either be the wrong fit, maybe they have the right skills, but they're the wrong fit, or maybe they feel good, but they don't have the right skills.
All right, well, let's talk about some tips to interviewing and getting the right person.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, so talk to me about, you know, maybe one of the first things a manager should know going into this.
You know, one of the first things, Joe, is that the manager should make sure their job description describes the job.
Oh, yeah.
You know, how many job descriptions have you read where you went, what is this person going to be doing?
Right. Other duties assigned. That always worries me. What does that really mean, Bill?
You know, that's
could mean anything.
Yeah, well, what it means is, you know, if we get stuck, then we're going to need you to do some things that maybe aren't in this job description.
Right.
So the job description is...
As long as those aren't the things they expect you to do all the time. That's kind of the point here, right?
Well, that's part of it.
Because that ought to be in the description.
Absolutely, because how are they going to measure you at the end?
Right.
You know, at the end of the year in the annual review. Are they going to measure you on the things that were in your job description, or are they going to measure you on those other duties as assigned? So the job description is the foundation of the entire recruiting process, not just the interviewing process.
All right. So an awful lot of times you're going to find somebody that goes on gut feeling alone. They look at a person, they're like, yeah, I feel good about this guy. I feel good about this girl. Is that a good way to hire?
No. Joe, I've been a recruiter since 1981. So since before some of your viewers were born. Right. And I wish I had a buck for every time I heard, this person feels good in my gut. And now, the last 10 years, I've been telling managers, you know, guts are really, really good for storing and processing food, not so good for selecting candidates.
We want some evidentiary reasons to hire someone, right?
Right, exactly.
Okay, so that's a better choice.
Yes.
All right, let's talk about maybe the first thing that's important when you're preparing to interview.
Well, you know, many times companies have teams interview people, and so what they need to do is prepare the other people who are in that team. You know, let's say you're interviewing a marketing candidate. Well, the marketing candidate's going to have to work with sales and finance, and so it's important for them to have members in that team, and then let those team members say, well, I want you to focus on how this person will be interacting with you in finance, and I want you to focus how this person will be interacting with you in sales. And so now when you have the marketing person interviewing, the finance person interviewing, and the salesperson interviewing, they're getting a really good 3D view.
A broad picture.
Right.
Okay, so that's pretty important. And I suppose we get down to the nitty-gritty too that way.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, that's how you really find out what their skills are.
Okay. I like this. Now this one I think is always interesting when we start talking about behavioral interviewing. And it seems to me that this is, and we see this I think a lot with airlines are especially focused on this an awful lot of the time. They're like, well, you know, how's he going to do in CRM, in the cockpit, the crew resource management? Is he going to get along with other people? And this seems to be, although certainly a good measure of a person, it can't be the only one.
You're right. You know, the premise of behavioral interviewing and the reason it's so important is humans just wonderfully predictive. If we found a way to be successful doing something one way in a certain situation, when we're put under stress, we're going to pretty much try to do the same thing every time from then on. And so the behavioral interviewing is so important from that perspective. But you also want to get a sense for fit. And so behavioral interviewing is one of seven different types of questions that you can ask.
Wow.
And when you ask those other questions, that's when you get a better sense for fit.
Okay. Now, is it always best for us to find somebody who's going to fit our, so to speak, our attitudes that we have in that company already, or is it sometimes a good idea to get somebody in there that's going to shake it up a bit? I mean, is that something you should determine what you're after at the outset again?
Oh, absolutely. You know, the problem with a person that shakes it up,
Yeah.
you know, a New York City personality in Utah,
Yeah, that could shake it up a bit.
that'll shake it up a bit, but it might not be the shaking up that you want.
Okay.
And therefore, it's important to understand, you know, we want somebody that has a little bit of edge, but we don't want them to run roughshod over
Right.
everybody else, because then nobody will work with them.
Yeah, so you don't want to necessarily, it depends on the situation, but maintaining status quo may be not the answer, but finding somebody who challenges us a little might be a good plan.
Somebody who sees things differently.
Yeah, okay, I like this. Then we move on to one of your least favorite techniques for hiring.
No, this is one of my favorite
Is it?
techniques.
All right.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I love to do this when I'm recruiting executives or salespeople.
Okay.
And the reason is they're not prepared for this. And what I do is I ask them a question, and I allow them to give me their response. And then what I do is I just stay quiet. And, you know, TV doesn't like quiet, radio doesn't like quiet,
Yeah.
and candidates don't like quiet.
It's true.
And so what I do is I go,
You just sit there and wait.
and they're going to talk. And many times these people then go into the confessional. I feel like I should be
Yeah.
blessing them. And they tell me things they way shouldn't have been telling me,
Yes.
because they're uncomfortable now and they don't know what to say next, so they just say something to fill in that space.
Yeah, you got to be comfortable with silence occasionally,
You do.
right? So how would I do if I did that? Let me ask you that question. Let's assume that I kind of don't fall for this. I realize that you're looking for more, and I just say, you know, I really answered my question. I believe I answered your question.
I believe I answered your question. Is there more information that I can give you on the topic? Get me talking. Get
All
me
right,
talking.
put it
Ask
back
me
on
a
them.
question.
And are
Yes.
you going to be impressed with this typically as an interviewer?
I'll just take it to the next step. That's all.
Right? Because I would think if somebody just sort of caught you on that, you'd be like, all right, sharp individual,
Yeah.
kind of impressed.
That's right.
Okay.
You know, it's okay. That's the way to handle that. That's the best way to handle it.
All right, let's talk about the last most important tip, maybe, or one of the most important ones.
Listen.
Okay.
I can't tell you how many times managers have asked me, Bill, would you sit in on this interview with us? And I've gone, sure. And I'll go and I'll sit in and I'll watch the person here. And what'll happen is they'll ask the question, and then I see them looking down at the next question, and they're not listening. They're going,
Right.
oh, I can't wait to ask them this question.
Yeah. Didn't hear the last one.
They didn't hear it, and that's where you get your follow-up questions, because you hear something that doesn't sound right, and you go, wait a minute, that didn't sound right.
And isn't that where the meat is? It's in the
That's
follow-up questions.
The meat is absolutely in the follow-up questions.
Okay. So, Bill, I guess one of the other thoughts that I have here is when you're getting together with this group, and especially if you're doing an interview with more than one person, a pretty important part of this too is to try to pick out the type of interview we're doing, because that's something I don't know that we entirely talked about. There's a lot of different tactics here. There may be the one where somebody's trying to off-balance somebody, and that's your job. I just want to see if you can take them off balance, get them upset. So there's other tactics sometimes that are involved here. Talk to me about some of those tactics and how one might be able to be aware of that as an interviewee.
Well, Joe, you know, it's one thing to have one-on-one
Yeah.
conversations, sometimes there's the panel interview where they'll have 2 or 3 people interview.
Very tough board interviews.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so what happens is they may agree to all at the same time shoot a question at you, and different questions, and just to see how you'll handle it.
Right.
And as a candidate, the best way to handle it is to take the one that pretty much spoke first and say to the other 2, would it be okay if I answered her question first, and then I'll get and answer each of yours? And so that's the best way as a candidate to handle that. But what you're trying to do is get them a little stressed.
Right.
And just see how they handle the stress.
Yeah, my favorite thing is to say, I can't wait to address all of your questions.
Yeah.
But I'd like to start with this one, and maybe just go with the one you have the answer to.
That's perfect.
That's probably best. I always look for okay, what's the thing I can answer easiest, and then move on. And that sometimes, that's a good approach, right?
Absolutely, because you're giving your brain in the background
Time to think.
opportunity to think. Yes.
The other thing that we should talk about that I think a lot of people fail to understand, and this is based on what you just said, remember we said having some silence is not something most people are comfortable with, but as an interviewee, an awful lot of the time, you need to take the time to say, I'd like to answer your question. I'd like a moment to think about my answer. And literally sit there in silence for a moment. There's nothing wrong with that, right?
Nothing wrong with it, and actually the manager will appreciate that, because that tells them something about you too.
Right.
The interview is a learning process for both sides.
Okay.
And I'm trying to learn more about you, you're trying to learn more about me and my company. And therefore, when I see a candidate say, let me just take a second to think about this. Okay, now here's what I would suggest. We'll do blah, blah, blah. And that tells me something about this person. He's just not going to run off half-cocked and do something.
I actually received something in the mail the other day where they were encouraging me to come to an interview for a job, and it said, "Here's all of our company information available to you on the web." I've never seen someone publish it like that. Here it is to remind you to look. But this is one of the most important things a candidate can do, and that's the proper research. Know as much as you can. If you can find out who's interviewing you, even better, right?
That's right, because you go to LinkedIn, look them up, see if there's anything that's common in your experience and their experience, and then you can talk about that during the interview.
Okay. An awful lot of this oftentimes isn't necessarily so much about do you have the skills for the job, because they probably know that going in. It's, are you the right person?
Right. That's exactly right. Are you the right person? Do you fit our culture? Do you have the right skills? Do you have the right experience?
All right. Well, I'm trying to fit the Bill Humbert culture. How'd I do?
You did fairly well, Joe.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'd almost challenge you to give me an interview right here, but I'm a little afraid. I'm not going to lie. He's a pro.
Thanks, Joe.
Recruiter guy Bill Humbert, thanks so much. It's good stuff from both sides of that. So hopefully you could take something to either to your next interview or when you're interviewing someone to find the right candidate for the job. It's Bill Humbert, Recruiter Guy, and I appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
The Recruiter Guy's Guide to Finding a Job, his book, so check that out as well. We'll be back with more right here on the Mountain Morning Show.